Record. Yep, there we are. And welcome to this week's Hackalong. We've got an interesting session today where we're going to be trying to map a project onto Holo-REA. And it's interesting to see this being done live. And so I think any projects out there who've been considering using value flows or Holo-REA, I think this is a great video to watch. Philly or Kamal, do you want to share a bit about your project, about Basyn? And then we could have Pospi share a bit, and then you guys can get going.
Go ahead, Kamal.
Thanks, Billy. Yes, Sid, do you want to just like a background of what we're doing and maybe what a biodigester is?
Just a minute or two, just to give people a quick one. And we can get into specifics later.
Yeah, the basic concept is a distributed, tamper-proof accounting platform that can help incentivize and coordinate biological circular economies, specifically around food waste. So how do we make it go into some kind of process where it can easily get back to other uses of food waste? So an example of a biodigester, you can make compost water out of it, but you can also make biogas, which actually can like move trucks and power buildings and things like that. So that's the general concept.
Cool. Thanks. Pospi, do you want to share any thoughts on how you want to do it? How you want to start the mapping?
We've already kind of done some mapping in the background, so I can talk through some of that at an abstract level, maybe as a start on the value flows side, and then we can get into the code. Because Phila's and Kamal have prepared some React app stuff, so I thought we could talk through, or they could talk through what they've done so far, and then we can talk from there about what the integration steps are.
Cool, yeah. Let's go with that.
Cool. I might share my screen actually, if you would enable that for me. These new security options are just aren't they?
You have to remind me every week. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll share it in the chat as well for those on the call. It's more so people can see it in the recording, I suppose. So yeah, this is the document that Lynn, I think, put together just to sort of describe the use case in REA terms based on what the conversations we've had with Kamal. So this stuff, these things are, where to begin this? So in every economy that moves resources, kind of the first thing you need to do is think about the types of resources that are going to flow through. So we kind of have these two main specifications. There's liquid fertilizer, and we have units of measure for those two because those are the ways we quantify things as they flow through the economy, and dollars as well. And this unit is actually just kind of a non-unit. We call it each sometimes as well, so it's kind of just saying like $1. And there's a few kind of stages to this. Some initial stage that could happen, may not, depending on how broad the use case gets, is having networks where people are tracking their bank balances, so you can see people's bank accounts as resources. Probably not going to do it for private people involved with the operations, I suspect, as customers. But something to, well, actually, hang on, is my build finished yet? Yes, it is. I'm dealing with the rather slow nature of the latest Holo-chain conductors startup, unfortunately. But I should be able to hack this up. It'll take a while. But Lynn was nice enough to put some of the fields here anyway. So basically one of the core things in REA is the E, the events, and that's the mechanism by which agents track all the things that are going on in the world. So we have attached to an economic event is a property called an action, which basically describes what was done to the resource. And we've talked about these on some calls before, but I'll jump back to them. There's only 16 of them, and we found over the last, or since the early 90s, I suppose, since Sensorica started doing this, that these 16 odd actions are kind of all that is needed to represent a full economy. So you've got producing things, consuming things, just making use of things, etc., etc., etc. The one that we're talking about with inventorying things is raise, which is really just adjusting the quantity up by the event. So with this modeling to start bank balances, you do just logging an event to raise by whatever value is in the account to start with, and that instantiates a resource for you. So there's this relationship between events and resources where you're never actually touching the resources directly. You're just logging events to say what you as a subjective agent in the network see is true, and the resources get calculated from that. Anyway.
Just a quick question, Sam. Can you not see the font? Do you want possibly to magnify it? Is that what you want in the chat?
No, just the URL. So I can reference it.
Oh, the URL of this pad.
The action.
Oh, the actions, sorry.
The actions you were showing there?
Yeah. The question here is always how do I get to chat?
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. I've got some issue in my, this is why you don't develop things while you're demoing, kids. So let's see. I suspect I may have not updated this. Interesting. I'm really hoping I can get the query browser working for this. It's just a default export, so quite strange that that's not working. Let me see. It seems like it's there. Oh God, the source maps. Ah, that'll be why. Okay, let's try that. Yeah, there we go. So this is the GraphQL Explorer that lets you do these things. So we might as well run through this. I won't show them all, but just kind of an example of what authoring GraphQL queries looks like, because it's quite nice in this graphical query browser, which a lot of you have probably already seen. And just to show, I'm running 3 commands here. This one is the conductor command. This is the sim2h server to help the conductor run. And this one, there's a command which is, I believe, yeah, GraphQL Explorer dev command, which is just running this React app. So that's kind of all the moving parts there, just for completeness. So we want to do a mutation, and we want to create an economic event. That's great. The other thing with these sort of mutations is that you also need some parameters to instantiate the resource. What have I? That's not used. So as you can see, the IntelliSense here is really quite nice. Is it resource? Oh no, it's new inventory resource, isn't it? Yeah. And with those two, you can hit Control Space, and it gives you a pop-up of everything that's allowable. So that's pretty nice too. So that's all we need there. And then, as per this, we want to raise event with 10,000. So raise, a point in time, doesn't really matter. We'll just leave it where it was in my last tests. These in final Holo-REA would be agent IDs. and probably in this case, they would both be set to your own ID because you're instantiating a resource for yourself. This would end up being some more complicated resource classification URI that probably links to a semantic web ontology, but we'll just leave it as a string for dollars at the moment. And we want 10,000. Oops. Is that still legible? Yeah. So that's the event. I'm just going to run it because it'll probably throw an error. Yeah, because, let's get rid of this. I have not included the resource. So, I forget which parameters are needed here. Maybe it's just the name actually. And let's call it customer bank account. And there you go. So we've created an event. And actually we've also created a resource, and I can pop that in here like this because the way I've implemented the resolvers, when you create an economic event, it'll send you back the details of the event and the resource. So, and note that with Holo-chain, because everything is idempotent, I can just run this again and get the same response. So there's the event ID and the resource ID of what's created with this mutation in the starter. And just to kind of pull it all back out again, I can run a query for economic resources, and maybe just we'll grab their ID and the name so we can see it's the same one. And interestingly, I've got a, yeah, so there's some issues with duplication every time you re-add the same resource at the moment, because in future versions of Holo-chain there'll be some randomness in there so that when you're adding the same event multiple times, it'll actually be a different record like you expect in a normal database. Yeah, so that's some really brief stuff of what it looks like in, you know, this format versus the format that's in this document. We probably just extrapolate the others from there. I won't go through typing them all in by hand and coding them all. So then beyond the bank balances, which are probably outside of this system, there's these three kind of main parts. Is it three? Yeah. So one, marketplace, where people are putting in offers to buy and sell things to the biodigester. Then there's part two, where people are actually committing to make those trades. Or, sorry, what's this one? This is the biodigester actually producing some fertilizer. And then we've got some orders here and some actual deliveries. And you'll notice the deliveries are economic events, the same as these initial bank account setups, because they're both things that have actually happened in the real world. And there's two economic events here. One is the transfer for 1,000 gallons of the fertilizer, and the other is the transfer of the $3,200 odd for the payment for the fertilizer. And those two events will be logged in much the same way as the one I've already done. The other types here, so you've got events for things that have happened or are happening. And then when you look further into the future, when we look at orders and committing to orders, we've got these things called commitments. Someone's talking. Is there a question?
I do have a question, but I wasn't talking.
Okay.
Yeah, jump in with the questions.
I heard.
So I was thinking, obviously this is for one application, but what if another application is also making resources that need to be tracked in this one? Is that the idea of REA? So everything's talking the same language. So if I've got,
it is.
Yeah.
And you're kind of jumping to the end here, but what the hey, we might as well show it now. This is another diagram of Lynn's in this economic network formation thread on the forum. I'll send it through the chat as well. I'm pretty sure it's not a private thread. But yeah, this is a little mock-up of how some of that might start to look when you start connecting different apps into networks. So this yellow kind of section here is the network of Basyn that we're playing with at the moment. But then you've got Shiro that Victor and Guillaume are working on, where they're talking about food distribution. So there are resource flows that can be lined up there across networks. And Kiki is talking about seed provenance and saving and sharing seeds. So there's other ways that you can integrate the growing of the seeds with the outputs from this biodigester as well. So yeah, a lot of interesting possibilities there. That might be a worthwhile topic for a future call once there's some more apps and UIs and data to play with, and we can start actually seeing it all ripple through. It'd be cool.
Thanks.
And
So,
just to
yeah.
be a little bit clear, if you can go back to that graphic possibly. The part of what we're focusing on right now is from the biodigester in the middle to grow food. It says biofertilizer. That's the specific spot we're focusing on right now.
Yeah, so everything we're talking about in this document is all related to that particular resource flow and the payments going back for it. So yeah, in terms of payment, we're really just talking about logging economic events. In terms of committing to orders and saying that you want to buy something, we're talking about commitments. And commitments are kind of fun because they're really very similar to economic events. In fact, they have most of the same fields. So I can create a commitment. It's going to be a commitment. Doesn't matter what I call it, so I'm going to keep calling it event because I'm lazy. And there we go. And check. And I just want to do this to show that there's not a lot that's different between them. So if I commit to producing something, say, I'll just call it fertilizer. I know there's probably a better term for that that indicates what it is properly. So say you're buying 100 litres of fertilizer, this would be a record to say that you are now kind of legally bound to go and to pay for the thing. So although the provider will be Basyn. So actually, so I'm doing all this wrong, aren't I? Then this would be a transfer. And resource quantity 1,000 gallons due tomorrow. And there's some other records here, agreements and proposals that we can talk about later, but I want to just talk about the core record types for the moment. And so there's one commitment here that says that at some time, in fact, it doesn't have to be some time, we could just say due, so before some time, Basyn will transfer me 1,000 gallons of fertilizer, and I should be able to create that, yeah. And similarly, when you're thinking about the reciprocal payment, so the UI what the UI would end up doing is running both of these together, because the equivalent transfer is that I should pay Basyn some dollars. I'm just going to put in 300. No, it wasn't that, for the privilege, and then a different commitments logged. And unfortunately, I don't have an API endpoint to get all commitments at the moment, but I could read them individually if we need to later. So yeah, these are very, very similar to events, many of the same fields. And then there are records in between that specify how they relate. So I'll just pull it up in the schema browser. Actually, it might be easier than talking through it. So you have, in the mutations, I wish you could search this. It's a fulfillment, right? So when I create a fulfillment, you're saying here, it's basically a record that links these two that I've already created here. So I can say that the economic event that I've logged, so if I logged another economic event to say that I had transferred this stuff, then in the process of logging the event, I can say that there's this other fulfillment between the event and the commitment. So basically saying how many these quantities all come from this measurement structure where you can say the unit and the value basically. But there's a couple of different quantities: a resource quantity of how much of the resource was transferred, another way of saying how much of the commitment was made. So you can kind of split this up. It doesn't all have to happen at once. Like if you only got 300 liters today and someone ordered 500, you can offer them that today and offer them another commitment, offer them another event tomorrow, and both can fulfill the same commitment that you made to offer it to them. So it's really designed to give this flexibility between what has occurred, what you want to occur, and looking right into the future at the marketplace stuff here when we look at intents, what you want to occur in the future. So the intents are kind of like expressions of what you'd like to happen that no one's agreed to yet. And then once you agree, you log commitments. And then once it happens, you log events. And between each of those, between event and commitment, you have fulfillment that gives you some wiggle room so that you don't have to do it all at once. And between commitment and intent, you have satisfaction that does the same thing. Yeah, I'll just pause there for a minute. That was a lot of terminology to throw out all at once. But essentially the goal is to enable flexibility over the long term, because the reality with economics and enterprise resource planning and all these things is that what you thought was going to happen is never what actually happens. So you need some ways of recording the nuance, and even being able to say, you know, you ordered 10 liters, but I've got 15, I'm going to give you that instead. So you can even overcommit and over satisfy.
Just want to pause and check in with some of the others on the call, Michael, Greg, Armando, like if you guys are feeling a bit lost, like anything specifically you guys want Pospi and Kamal and Feli to cover, just feel free to jump in. Or we can keep
no,
going.
hey,
Okay.
Pospi, I was going to tell you, this is exactly how I learned Palantir. We had scenarios like this, and then we had to build it out in Palantir. So no, following well, and yeah, thanks for that flexibility, because as you're saying that, I was thinking about work. I work in Africa, and so you know, you can't even see the things that are going to sideswipe you, and it's cool that you've built that in there. It's amazing, actually.
Oh, not me. This work started long before I was even born. I'll throw into the chat too. There's the value flows pie story is a really good introductory material that runs through a tangible scenario like this. Yeah, it's really worth reading. Well, I'm thinking maybe we switch over to Feline and talk about the code that's existing in the front end and what it looks like at the moment, and then we can talk about what tying the GraphQL stuff we just saw into that looks like.
Just quickly before you move on, Pospi, I noticed on the fulfillment, I think it was, there was an effort. Is that the cost of doing the transaction effectively? So you say, here's the effort of me doing this transaction, and that's like mine taking away from the overall value.
Want me to take that one, Pospi? Yeah. So we have two different quantities, because resource quantity, everywhere it occurs, is doesn't have to be material, but it's something like that. Effort is for work or usage. And we split them out because if you have, say, a piece of equipment, you're going to have one piece of equipment in your inventory. That's the resource quantity. If somebody goes and uses it for 3 hours, that's the effort quantity. So they're different units of measure and different things. So part of that is because events are so broadly used. Like you can use them for work, you can use them for usage of equipment, and you can use them for the normal things you would think about.
Right. So someone might be using a hammer, and that hammer gets used up eventually. So you might say a hammer's got 10,000 hours worth of life in it, and then
You could.
and then
Yeah, if you were doing.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, you know, if you're going to use a hammer for an hour, that doesn't feel much. But if you use a hammer for 10,000 hours, then that's what it costs to it.
So like some kinds of equipment, people keep track of that because every 10,000 hours or something, they're going to do a preventive maintenance or whatever. So yeah, you can use it for that for sure. You can also just use it to say, I used your piece of equipment for 3 hours, and we've agreed that I'm going to pay you whatever, you know, $20 an hour for the use of that equipment. Or
Right. Okay.
Or even just for real-time depreciation, right?
Yeah.
You can also do some really cool stuff with that attribute. Some of the fields on the economic event, there's these two input and output fields that link them to processes. We haven't really talked about processes yet because most of what Basyn are doing at the moment are just transfers and exchanges. But the actual process of digesting the food lasts would be kind of a central process that sits in the middle of their network. And so when you set up the event to say that you're going to use the biodigester to do that, and you say that it's the input of this process and the output of that process, what you can infer from that is that until this process, no, they don't have, here we go. Until this process is finished, once it's begun and before the end time, then you know that the biodigester is in use and you can't use it for any other events or processes. So there's some interesting kind of enterprise queries you can make off that.
I had a question about the diagram you showed of the different networks with resources. Is if everyone is using the same, or I'm imagining if everyone's in the same Holo-REA instance, then they can, there's a question about sharing resources between different, I guess, sub functions or something. What happens if they're speaking across like Holo-REA and some other thing that speaks value flows? Is there a way to refer to the same resource, like kind of like a pass a pointer or call by value or something across?
Yeah, so this was the large body of work that we put together early on to scope that out. But basically, it means that you need some URI resolution format that works between DNAs, so that I can say that the economic event that I'm linking to in this DNA is actually an economic event from some foreign DNA that's bridged in. So yeah, all of that should work eventually. Doesn't work yet. And sort of depends on some holochain core features that are still in development and coming quite soon, I think, actually. Yeah, so does that answer your question? That's one part of it anyway.
That's the, I guess, within things that speak or are Holo-REA, they can pass URIs. And I guess if it was a different, I don't know, the activity pub one, maybe that's still yet to be fleshed out, how you speak resources across instances.
Yeah, that's a future hope, goal, and we're counting on it happening someday. But yeah, there's a bunch of technical issues.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Can I pop in one little thing here? So what happens in real life networks where you have multiple companies who are using different software and they want to exchange resources? One thing if you're familiar with barcodes, there's an organization that developed the barcode standard. They also publish identifiers for different products, and that gets down to like the resource type of that product. Like that's what you'd see on an Amazon screen or something like that, and that's also what you're going to see on a case of maybe it's like a product or something like that. And also on that case, you're going to have, so you're going to say, okay, this is cherry pie, and then it's this lot of cherry pie that was produced on June 1st, 2020, in someplace in Minnesota. And and so all of that gets encoded into these things that go on that get printed on the case. And so you can also exchange all that information between companies, and they do that all the time. And so then if that cherry pie ends up making somebody sick in Boston and it was produced in Minnesota, then you have to be able to track back, where did that come from? When was that produced? How did it get there? At what stage in that whole process did something come in and make that person sick? So you have to be able to trace back all that stuff, and it all has that same lot identifier and that universal product code or resource type. So like that's how that stuff is done in large supply chains and commercial enterprises. So we're gonna have to do rough roughly the same thing using different technologies.
So there could be a sort of out of band communication of resources, and then later could be internalized, perhaps.
Maybe. I don't know that it is necessarily out of band. Eventually, I think it's just the way that these things work. You know, like linking things between two different holochain DNAs is kind of out of band as well from a certain perspective, I'd say.
Okay.
But the core thing, I think, is just that every record has a unique URI that's protocol relative. So there'll be some holochain URIs and some web URIs that point to ActivityPub stuff. I won't dive too deeply into the code, but I just kind of wanted to dig through some of the Commons Pub stuff to show that really there's an Apollo client at the root of the Commons Pub app that comes through like some React providers using Apollo provider. It's all very standard if you know anything about Apollo and GraphQL and React. But the way that the two are set up, they're quite pluggable because they both actually use the same as this shared GraphQL schema. And I'm gonna I haven't actually updated my bookmarks to go to, the new instance yet. But both projects actually align on this schema, which means that they're completely protocol compatible, and therefore any UI components that work for the Holochain version that's Holo-REA will also work for the ActivityPub version that's Commons Pub without any change to the actual views. It's only that provider that needs to change to toggle them out. And then some of the stuff that I was showing the other week with Holo-REA that I've been working on in order to compose GraphQL APIs together would be the final piece that would mean that you could take one Apollo client and have Holo-REA and Commons Pub both wired up inside it and dealing with the two seamlessly as if it's all one API. So yeah, that's the long-term goal.
Cool, thanks.
No worries. All right, I'll hand over to Philae. He's coming back.
Did he, maybe he hadn't heard you, Philly? How do am I saying your name right? Or maybe he isn't on. I don't know if Kamal can fill in.
I'll throw Felly a quick text just to see what's going on.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, no, there he is.
Felly, we can't hear you, FYI. I think your mic is not working.
I could hear you earlier.
Nope, still not.
We've both been having computer issues this week.
Philly's computer thinks it's me right now, so maybe that's what it is.
Check, check.
Yeah.
There you go.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Oh, weird. All right. Yeah, I just switched to my dev computer to share the code, but webcam is not. Well, doesn't work on that OS. So but yeah, here we have. Oh, let me share it again. Okay, so here we have the prototype. Very minimal, but basically charting between the payment from Bob, the biodigester operator who's producing biofertilizer for Carol. And we actually have a graphic for this just to make it clear. Let's see. So the invoice is really for Carol. And we're starting here because we're building a prototype for biofertilizer that's already installed, and they want some sort of way of coordinating the fertilizer with farmers on the island where it is nearby here in Seattle. And right now, that's their main problem, so we wanted to start with that. So the first step we're working with is an invoicing system that can track the biofertilizer for Carol. She sees that it's unpaid. She's requested delivery. Just for the example, it's $2,500 for 1,000 liters. And she goes to pay the bill. This is a little bit wonky now. The field, of course, now is down here. And we're still wrapping all the React components to follow through with this. But this is just the working start. And here's the app.js file that, if you're familiar with React, this is sort of the head brain of the operations of the front end. And so I've been digging around in some Apollo documentation, and would love to hear from Possibly about best practices when it comes to doing these things. So that's where I'm at right here.
Awesome.
Yeah, but the idea is just to really make it clear. We would be calling the Holo-REA API for this economic resource, this economic event, which would update the underlying invoicing, I guess, JSON sort of structure, and it would update this to be paid. Bob would get a note of the fulfillment, or sorry, is it satisfaction? I'm still learning. And Carol's balance would go down to 0. So all of that would be a Holo-REA API interaction. So we use this GraphQL layer through the Apollo client to access that. But right now the code doesn't have that. I understand we have to import some stuff, have it on another branch, but I would love to hear from Possibly what we should do.
Cool. Shall we dive in then?
Yeah.
Thanks for the background. Does anyone have any other backgroundy questions before we move on?
Or maybe just one quick one. So I can see you've built it in React. Is that calling, obviously it's calling Holochain stuff, but is it calling directly to Posby's Holo-REA, or have you written a sort of in-between layer between the two?
Yeah, we're going to be calling the Holo-REA directly, the API functions. So the outward-facing functions that access the Holochain activity that Possibly has written.
Cool, so you don't actually need to write any Rust from your end, that's already done.
Correct. And actually, so there's this module in NPM, which I actually need to update with the new API. There's been some subtle changes, but this basically is everything you need to connect to Holochain. And as long as you're running the conductor in the background, this will just work basically. And yeah, I've booted up the prototype. So this is the same thing that Philae was looking at just before. It's a little bigger on my screen. There we go. We've got this build pay modal, all that stuff is all there and working. So first things first is to get a GraphQL connection in the app. And you asked for feedback, so I can give you little bits and pieces as we go if you want, Philae, if that's useful.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. I guess my comment on this app file, and I think it's probably just a consequence of that you're starting out, is that it's quite big. And React apps tend to work very well when you split things out more and more. code in general does, I guess, maybe is more the thing. But this is kind of an extreme version of that. But this is me basically trying to have a root boilerplate for an app that doesn't have much at all in it. So you see the only dependencies here really the GraphQL, React, and the router. And then I'm kind of pulling all the provider stuff into its own module. So there's all these other things here to do with app theming and internationalization, and even like the little toast notifications that pop up and global styles and stuff. So I've chucked all that in its own module that's all sort of split out, so that then in the main app, all I need to do is import this one module and all the dependencies are dealt with in there. Just helps to make things cleaner, or else I often end up over time with large projects ending up with dependencies that I'm like, what is this for? I don't remember putting it in here. And even within the React providers, you'll see I've split out the GraphQL client even further from that into its own little module, because when you look at the dependencies for the GraphQL one, there's quite a lot of weird stuff in there for Commons Pubs usage, all kinds of caching, and Absinthe is an Elixir backend that they're using, and all kinds of stuff there. But we don't need any of that because we've got VF GraphQL Holo-chain, and I might as well put it in a new file. So let's make. And the other thing with this app, oops. Get this box. The other thing with this app is that you could be using TypeScript. All the stuff that we've been doing has TypeScript support, but you don't have to by any means. Where did that file go? Did I just create it somewhere dumb? I don't even know. No, it's just waiting. So for this, you're really mainly looking at the Apollo packages, and I might just grab stuff out of the GraphQL browser we were looking at before, because I've done it all before there already. So you want schema link from the Apollo schema link. Oh, and this is, I'm not sure if you're using imports. You are, cool, okay. We also are going to want this one, and where's the client get instantiated? I think it must do it internally here, so I'm probably going to need Apollo React as well. So how does it go? 90% of development is just looking up documentation on the internet. Here we go. So I also want Apollo client, and probably doing memory cache would be good. You're using semicolons, unlike me. So those are sort of the base modules to get started. The other one is React Apollo, which will be in the other view. Let's start with these two. So Apollo client, Apollo links schema, oops, Apollo caching memory, React Apollo, and of course the critical piece that actually makes it talk to Holo-chain. Okay, so while that's doing that, we might want to copy some code from here, or here, rather. This one. I don't think I need that. That's a schema link. And schema. And this is where in here you can put all the options for which modules, etc. Also the DNA ID bindings. But yeah, look at the docs of the module, you'll find all that stuff. And that is actually all you need for the moment. And I'll leave it at that maybe for this, but most of the time, no, let's do it now. You're probably actually going to want to put all this in an async function. And the reason for that is really just that often you need stuff in your GraphQL configuration, it has to be loaded asynchronously. Like sometimes you have to make an introspection query to a server to figure out how to talk to it. Other times the memory cache might need to do something to load, like if there's session storage that you want to bring in. So it just helps to have an async function there, so that you can bring it in easily later. And is that going to compile? Let's find out. Or does this not do real-time compiling? Oh, well, hang on, the file isn't actually linked, so that would be why. So I'm going to chuck it in the app, I suppose. And that would actually, let's call that. So then in the constructor, I can do init GraphQL client, then oops. So what I'm doing here is really just wiring it through. A lot of people don't do this, but it leads to problems later because, again, from that asynchronous thing. So you kind of want the root level of your app to be watching in some way for when the client's ready so that you can handle errors, which we won't do at the moment, but let's at least put some error output so you can see if anything went wrong. So if there's any initialization errors booting up GraphQL or anything, then you can handle them in your app component and show an error saying the server is down, come back later, or whatever you need to do. And we'll put client in here as a default property. I'm glad to be doing this in JavaScript actually, because if it was TypeScript, I'd be getting a lot more complaints from the compiler, I'm sure. And let's see, is that? It's React scripts, right? So it should all dynamically reload. Interesting. Okay. This might be a TypeScript exporty thing, actually. I might have to do this. Maybe. Like, of all the complex things to deal with, it's always the simplest things that are the most problematic. Oh, line 10. Oh, okay, it doesn't like that. Okay. I'm just going to see what that's actually giving me. Oh, my bad. It's actually. I might just. Yeah. Helps if I'm working on the right project. So, I got this. Let's try that. No. Right, well, let's see what it is. So, that looks like a schema to me. Oh, I know why. It's because we're talking to an older version of this module and I haven't updated it for the latest changes. So, for now, I'll just do this, but we'll yeah, it would want to be like that eventually. I'll just be a good citizen and make it right. The reason is this version doesn't have a green in it. That's why there's an update there, and that pull request hasn't been merged yet. So that should work. That looks more like it. And that is actually all that is needed. Like you can't actually tell because there's nothing on the page yet, but the fact that it's initting and not throwing errors means that there is a client here. I don't know, do I still have, yeah, I do have reactive tools. Okay, so we even be, here we go. There you go, state client, there it is. That is the GraphQL client for Holo-REA that we just made. So yeah, integration is as simple as that. Any questions so far? None so far. Cool.
I wanted to, well, one, I just want to say thank you. That was amazing. I wanted to, at some point, I would love to just talk about the stacks, like where REA fits in with like the conductor, things like that. There was a graphic I sent a while back. At some point, I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, maybe we can do that on another call, I'm not sure. There it is, get started. But yeah, I do owe you an update to those diagrams. I think the main thing was that you sort of seeing things as being separate in terms of separate conductors, but actually it's probably more that things are kind of nested more within the same conductor. I think that's really the only inaccuracy in that diagram at the moment.
Can you elaborate on that? Because in my head, like there's
these
no
ones, right? I already did this. What do you think? Or do you want to share the diagram? Come on. Yeah, that's right. Got it. So yeah, there's this one. There's another one that's got a couple of different modules laid down in side by side, but it's mainly these. This here is actually the conductor at this layer, not a DNA. And then these are probably going to be separate DNAs, I would say. But this is all back to the whole modularity rabbit hole of whether zones or DNAs are better organizing things. And you can certainly bundle Holo-REA as being entirely zone-based within the same DNA. I'm just doing it as separate parts at the moment, but I think there's a likelihood that you're going to want different arrangements anyway, where sometimes you want things connected in the same DNA and sometimes you want them split out. But yeah, that's more or less the only difference, I think. And then, yeah, the UI is here, gets served to the browser out of the conductor, and then it's interacting straight through the DNAs. And in some cases, there might be bridging where the DNAs talk between each other, but otherwise, it's pretty spot on.
And every agent in Kamal's network would have to have the REA, Holo-REA package installed, right? Like there's no way around that.
It depends on what their roles are and what they're interested in. Like many of them, well, that was the other thing about this, was thinking about multiple REA collaboration spaces and where they might overlap. So it might be that there's an REA network that manages all the internal operations of the biodigester that's sort of encapsulated as the biodigester, and it's linked to another network that's the marketplace network. It's kind of broader access to the public for people that want to just trade with the biodigester and may not care about the internal operation. So yeah, there's some things that you could detail here in terms of splitting that out, but really at the end of the day, it's all just going to be separate DNAs within people's conductors. And if someone like the Basyn folks would probably have all the Basyn stuff and all the marketplace stuff and, you know, a bunch of other things for networks that might plug in. But if people don't have the Basyn stuff, it doesn't matter. They can still see the stuff in the marketplace update to say that things are happening, but they just need to join the network to go in and dig in and find out what those events actually are.
So how wouldn't they need the Holo-REA packages? Like even if I'm transacting, if I'm just buying it in the marketplace?
Yeah, I wish I'd done diagrams for these. I did do a kind of, this cross-border trade one is one of those really. Like here you've got the customer has their own has a marketplace network that they're broadcasting in, but they also have these observation networks that they're listening into. But the marketplace network is still going to be updated with the status to say that, you know, your intent is being satisfied and thus your order is being filled, without needing to actually see the commitments and events that the courier is making. So you just have a pointer to another record that says that, and the commitment gets updated to say, yes, I'll take it. But it's actually those bridging records that work that way. So when you would log an event, when you would log a fulfillment in here to say that an event the courier is doing is fulfilling a commitment that's been made, the fulfillment actually gets logged here and also gets logged into the bridge planning DNA that it's connected to. And eventually that'll be a one-to-many kind of thing. So if I log an event, there might be 5 different networks that
get updated.
has occurred.
So they just need to be, they just need to have that one of those networks installed at that end to be able to.
Yeah, and for external customers, I suspect it might be this kind of thing where they just have the planning and proposal network spaces that are around the biodigester, and they don't really care about the events of the biodigester. But I think it's also probably something that their interaction would lead them into fairly quickly. Like the first thing you're going to do is like, well, I want to see that. What's going on? And then you click installing a holochain DNA that loads in your conductor, and then you load the information, and that's kind of how it would flow.
Good.
Anyway, we didn't quite finish this yet. So there's one other piece once we've got the client. I need React Apollo. I already did, you know. Because it's this Apollo provider. Oh, it's in Apollo React hooks now. Eh? Okay. So I don't need this. Do you need that? And then pull this in. And this is how, so I've initialized the client, but I haven't done anything with it yet. That's the bit I'm missing here. So the way that React integrates is really quite easy. This is all it is, really. So I'll just chuck them in both of these for now. So that's all it ends up looking like. You just sort of wrap it with what you need. Let's make it a bit nicer. JSX is kind of dirty for formatting, but if you use the brackets as wrappers, it's not bad. I think that's what you need, right? Yeah. And so there's some things that you'd want to do here as well. So like where I'm initializing it up here, I could actually make this like that. And then I've got some state within this component to check on. So which means that when I come to down here, oh, my bad, I put these in the wrong place. Yeah, right, that's a little in the function. Okay, got it. So these would be more like here around the whole thing. So yeah, that's, but then you might want to do something in here of like, return some view to say that, you know, some kind of thing like that. Very, very dirty, but you get the idea. So then let's see if it actually loaded up. I expect that in my bridge. Huh. There we go. Error is not defined. Line 34. Huh. Was not past a client instance. Oh, well. that's interesting because it should have been. Maybe let's do it this way. There you go. Okay, so that is now loading, and you can see the Apollo provider here. So it's all wired in. And for those that know React, Apollo just links into React's context. So one of the key parts of React is the whole idea of props, that every component, these probably have some, every component takes some props from its parent that are like DOM attributes that tell it how to behave. But there's also a context, which a lot of things, like if you've ever used Material UI, it makes you do one, and all these other things that I was looking at in Commons Pub before are part of it. But basically, it hooks into the component, and then anything under it doesn't have to be passed explicitly or have access to it. So that Apollo provider is sort of the last piece of magic that wires into the app. And once that's done, then you get into requesting data. And so there's this use query helper, but there is somewhere, who knows though, it's been a while since I used this. Yeah, it looks like they've kind of cleaned it up and made it simpler now, because there used to be some components you could use that you'd give them the query as a prop and it would give you a bunch of data back. But this does look much simpler now. Let's try one anyway. It might break, but it might just return an empty array, which is what I would like. So where's use query come from? Hooks, okay. Oh, I need GraphQL tag as well. So these days JavaScript's got some pretty nice. Actually, Philo, maybe we can do this on the modal pop-up to separate it. Which component am I looking at? Oh, modal screen. That makes sense. This is the one, right? Yeah, this looks like a form. No, that's all right. I'll just do it in here. This is.
Sorry, which one are you looking for?
I'm just kind of looking for a cleanish view that I can stick some logic in as a test.
I did not. That's not component based. It's kind of, I mean, it's a big component, but it's really messy right now. We'll have to redo that.
Is there like, because this is what I was just looking at, right?
So yeah, up top it says pay your bill. There's a little form. That might be the only thing you can actually interact with there.
I'll just define it as a new component just so it doesn't mess up with your code anyway. So yeah, those, and I'm just going to copy and paste some stuff. You know, my first job, there was a rule that you were forbidden from copy and pasting, and if anyone found copy-pasted code in your commits, you got in so much trouble. It's kind of funny. But yeah, this here will just take the same exact queries that we've been running here. So this one to get all the economic resources. So I can just put it in like that. Query is optional actually with GraphQL. So we do that. Use query. Yeah, so this use query gives you back a bunch of useful stuff. The main things for queries are just the error, whether or not it's loading, and the data that you get back from the query. So in this case, the data is going to follow the same format that you see here, basically. So we'll get data.economicresources.id should give us what we need. So data.economicresources.map. I'm not even going to put in a select. Let's just yep. And that'll do it, I think. So I should then be able to and that's a component, should probably give it a capital name. So I've got some routes here. Let's see. Make element for screen, model screen, start screen. Okay, let's do it on start screen. Start screen. And I'm just going to put it. Is this all kind of visible? Let's try here. See how much it likes it. Not much. Oh. And that's just a React thing. That's because when the Babel compiler runs over this and encounters JSX, it'll turn that into react.createElement calls on the fly. So data is undefined. Interesting. Let's see what we got to start with. Loading true undefined. Missing field economic resources. Interesting. These are quite cool because actually the GraphQL tooling integrates with this GraphQL tags. So it'll no, missing field economic resources. That is a
Just a quick check-in on time, in case people want to head off. Do you? Yeah.
It is that when I boot this thing up, so I've already defined the port, so because I'm running the GraphQL Explorer on the other one, but there's also this one. Actually, I don't have to remember it, it's in package JSON here. Yeah, so normally when you run a HoloChain app, a UI app from the conductor, it auto detects the how to connect to HoloChain. But because I'm running this outside of the conductor through Create React app, it does not. And it'll be here. And so that means I need to do this in order to set some stuff that I've coded up internally that tells it how to connect to HoloChain. So I do that. And yeah, this is kind of a common area I see with GraphQL. When it doesn't get anything back, you just get undefineds from the resolvers, or you do sometimes get null.
Mm.
We've got data is undefined again. Eh? Same deal. Yeah. Well, I think there's something wrong with my query there, but maybe other people can talk and ask questions, and I can tinker with this while people talk.
Yeah, and I'm also just wanted to bring up where over time. So maybe what do you think, Possibly? How should we navigate this? Like, how long do you think we should keep going?
I mean, this is kind of it, really. Like, this should work, and when I commit this code and push it, I might just put a link or copy paste this file or something into the forum thread so people can see what the final result is. But it's something with the way that GraphQL binds, I'm sure. Actually, you know what? It's probably even more just that I'm using the old. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's actually this now, I think. Yeah, there we go. So that's the old API method. They changed in the last update. And there's some other rendering error here, but oh yeah, it's actually the same error because the other is going to be this now. And there you go. There's those two resources that we saw in the console area here. So well, two of the same resource because of the duplicate link thing, but you get the point. And that's a UI app doing everything needed to connect to Holo-chain and pull data out of it and run a query, basically. So yeah, we'll put this back to the new, I don't know, to the new version and away to publish now.
Easy peasy.
So easy, even with all my missteps.
That's quite cool. Quick questions or reflections?
One thing I think about is Lynn's diagram about these three different apps connecting to each other. That's a dream. So looking forward to a world where that happens as well.
And yeah, when you extrapolate that, that can be really cool, right? That can have some seriously far-reaching consequences, like just the meshing of networks or the infinite possibilities of meshing networks.
Yeah, you can make a whole economy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is kind
fractals is a really good way to put it.
of.
Fractal sense-making economies is what I've been using lately.
Yeah.
My thoughts are philosophical around how maybe it's an REA thing, but I'm not sure, or a Holo-chain, but it's like how it feels like it's really atomizing, like every worker is just a resource. So where's the ability of workers to kind of organize in this environment to make sure that they're not getting ripped off in terms of how much effort, how much value they get for their effort?
Those are important questions, but I'm not sure. We definitely don't have workers as resources. That's not quite a strong position in our world.
That's what the A is about, is agents. So, and you're an agent because you have agency. So we don't have human resources, and we don't, so a worker is never a resource. A resource is somebody's work for 3 hours can be considered like a resource, but no. And that there's a whole model of relationships between agents that's involved that we don't really have working yet in Holo-chain because we need group agents. But you can define any kinds of relationships between people and or organizations that you want, basically.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, much less that people are resources and much more that people are masters of their own destiny and able to allocate their scarce time resources wherever they like. I think we did have some questions once. Someone wanted to do an HR kind of staffing up and turn people into resources, and I think we were all kind of opposed to the idea and didn't want to help.
Yeah, because I feel that's kind of like one of the guiding principles of Holo-chain in itself, kind of like almost like a underlying principle that doesn't get maybe expressed enough, but as long as that's always there in the thinking that's going on, like I'm happy. I would hate for this to turn into some kind of like how capitalism just seems to take over every good thing you do and then create something bad out of it. I would hate for that to happen here as well. That would be make me sad.
Me too.
Yeah, that's my life in the blockchain industry you're describing.
I mean,
Hey,
actually,
Greg here.
Holo, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Then.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, Holo-REA and value flows will support capitalist stuff too. It's very agnostic. So, it's how you use it.
It's a big reason why. I was just saying, it's a big reason why we've been talking about, like with biodigesters, like how to community own the infrastructure, like where does public utility come in, where does cooperative economics come in. So that's an important piece of the puzzle too.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Sorry.
Doesn't really. Sorry.
No,
go
ahead.
The model doesn't really push any ideology, but the people developing it certainly do.
Hey, just real quick, guys. It's funny. So I'll post in the chat a 12-minute video of Huffington Post that highlighted one of the projects we did. And in this village that sits 5 hours from a paved road, we put a waste to energy electric grid in. And, it's funny, I had a vision of how I wanted to use Holochain in that context. But every week that I learn, I realize I don't know what the potential is. But I would like to further the conversation with you guys to kind of say, hey, here's this community. It's kind of a last mile community, has the cornerstones of a circular economy now. And there isn't much cash up there. Like I've wiped out all the physical cash by paying payroll to day laborers, So when you look at like the potential of finding a real world model of a cashless society where value is flowing, this might be a good village. I have a name in the tribe. I have good influence with the village council, and they gave me 5 acres of land around the machines we put in. So a lot of like things already set in place. But I'll connect with you guys in the forum, and maybe we can talk more.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting point. There's many ways to look at theories of social evolution and how economics plays into that. And you have, for instance, in the Soviet Union, big efforts to collectivize agriculture, and but they wanted to jump straight from like a quote unquote peasant economy into a socialist economy, and it's kind of ended in a lot of disaster. And so what we're trying to do here is kind of learn from the more cooperative, peasant cooperative kind of experiments that were going on even before that revolution, and sort of see what we can work with to sort of create different economic experiments. And I love the idea of trying this out in different contexts. And a big design principle we're trying to bring is have enough flexibility for each type of organization that wants to use the software, and organize and govern their biodigester in a way that makes sense for that context, because it's going to be different for each and every community, So that's why we're really emphasizing the peer-to-peer aspect of this, and how some groups are going to want to network, and sort of work together to mass a certain amount of scale to sell to larger, stockyards or shipping yards. Or different things that need that kind of that kind of. Just for example, the biodigester produces a lot more fertilizer than it does biogas, but if people wanted to amass biogas together in a network, they would have enough to power a grid of different scales. So like allowing for different flexibility of those experiments, and it's going to be a lot of modularity basically, and we're trying to work with a model of business that would allow for that to happen, to have a sort of organization version and a community, open source version. And so these are just things that are going on in the background in our conversations. And so we're happy to talk with people about economic thinking that goes on, and the different governance models and all that kind of stuff. So.
Very cool.
Thank you to Basyn and Len and Bob.
Thank you.
Amazing.
If we're closing out, Greg, do you want to real quick share highlights from the Hackalong last night, the Europe America Hackalong? Because I think I should have done this at the start of the call, but I think it's a good practice to just share insights.
Sure. Yeah. Real quick. They just went over basically the identities. Josh briefed on identities, and then he got into profiles and what's the other one? Profiles and it's another P.
Personas.
Personas. Thank you. And we went over the differences between the two.
Oh, interesting. And this is Josh Fairhead? No.
No, I don't know his last name. I don't know
Oh,
Josh's
okay.
last name.
Okay.
Sorry.
Anyway, but anyway, that sounds interesting. So I will check it out. Any last closing thoughts or reflections? No, but
That was fun to watch. That was really
yeah,
awesome.
it was. I'm actually gonna go back and watch the recording.
I'm not surprised when people enjoy watching coding. Like, this is not normally my
Yeah,
daily thing.
but this is the fun bit of coding, right? Like just integration. Feels
Yeah.
like you get to do all the creative work without the stuff that Posby and Lynn and Bob have done already.
The last 18 months of hard slog.
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of do have a fun reflection, just that it's really inspiring hearing the kind of reflections that Feli is making, and this need to be highly modular and adaptive is very important, I think. So it's nice to see that that's sort of well understood in this community.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, we know what doesn't work, but when we're doing new things, we don't always know. So we know what we don't like, so, but we don't always know what the new thing is going to be. And so I feel like it's going to be a lot of different experiments and different contexts, different people, different wisdom, and yeah, no one can really. And right now, what technology does is it allows for like social coordination, really well. But like was mentioned here, that can be over. It really depends on the developers, and how much, what kind of infrastructure they're setting out, and it can be over determining in some ways. And so yeah, so it's a really interesting space to be going forward, and yeah, I'm excited to be on this journey with you all. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Very cool.